It's just a few minutes too.
On behalf of the other two, I apologise for their absence. I don't know, maybe they've withdrawn their papers, but and I'm not going to fill an hour and a half, I don't think, unless we get into some really interesting dialogue. What I want to do this morning is share with you some of the work that I've been doing over the last couple of years, and the focus of my paper is how do I create my living educational theories of practice. And what I'd like to do today is, I don't want to get into a situation where I'm actually downloading all this information onto you. What I'd like to do is try to get into some dialogue as we go along, and I would like to learn from your ideas as you think about what I'm saying to you here, and maybe we can have a learning dialogue going on. Can you see that? It's a little pale background. Okay. So, how do I create my living educational theories of practice? What I want to do this morning is I'm going to describe some of my practice, and that's a very important part of what I want to do. I want to actually describe what I do in my practice, which, alongside lots of other practitioners, is very multi-layered, quite complex in places. So I want to give you a flavour of what I do in my practice. I'm also going to try and explain some of my actions to you, which again is very important for me this morning, that I actually do that. What I'm also trying to do this morning is develop an epistemology of accountability through this very act of explaining and describing my work. What I mean is I want to actually say and try to show you what I know about my own accountability and how I come to know that. And I'm really at the beginning of that process for me. That's ahead of me, if you like. But this is me starting off looking at my accountability practice, which is surfacing as a theme in my doctoral study. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to offer my living educational theories of practice, which is based on Jack's work, looking at living educational theories. So I'm going to try to explore with you this morning what I mean by that and what that looks like coming out of an ordinary practitioner, if you like. And then I'm going to be seeking validation for my claims. So what I'm going to also ask from you, as I want this to be a two-way process, is that you say whether or not you can see what I'm trying to explain to you this morning, whether or not you can see me living out any of my articulated values as I go through, and I'm going to explain why that's important, hopefully. So that's some of what I want to do this morning, and also I want to also listen to you and your stories and learn from your experiences as well. So that's very important for me. Good morning. Can I just say that video is very much focused on me, which is probably why my nerve levels have gone up. Okay, so importantly, what is my context? And I'm currently a senior lecturer in education at St Mary's University College in Twickenham. I have been a primary practitioner for many years. I won't tell you when I qualified because that might age me, but more years than I care to think about. I worked in primary classrooms, which gave me great joy. Took on an awful lot of roles, did all sorts of things as primary practitioners, as teachers do, managerial roles, communication, all sorts of roles within my practice. And didn't really ever think I was going to move away from that. I thought I was going to be a primary teacher until I retired. But I had a student from St Mary's and worked alongside this student, and there seemed to be a little gap in their knowledge in terms of special educational needs, which was, I was the Senko in the school at the time. And I voiced that to the link tutor, who said, okay, come and put your money where your mouth is, come and do some voluntary, some VL work in St Mary's, doing some work on the role of Senko and special educational needs, which I did, and I absolutely loved it. It felt very different. It felt very grown up because I was out of my classroom. I don't know if any of you are teachers here, but we get very entrenched, you're nodding, we get very entrenched in our own classrooms. So to be outside that classroom during school time feels really, I felt very grown up. I put my best suit on, all of those things, and absolutely loved it. What I also loved was the challenge that it brought, and I am going to explore that a little bit later on. So I went in almost by default into teacher education, and Maria and I listened to a couple of papers yesterday about pathways into teacher education, and they fitted me exactly. I was there almost by default, but felt my practice re-energised, if you like. in coming into St Mary's. I'm also a Year 1 coordinator, and I showed these slides to a critical friend who asked me, well, why have you put these things down? First of all, that's because they're the first things that came into my head. But secondly, I realised that actually these are the things that bob to the top, if you like, when I want to talk about my practice. And the second point and the fourth point are very closely linked to me. A lot of my work involves teaching large groups. So I teach from 90 to 120 students at a time, because I teach professional studies, which are the generic issues, and they're timetabled in that way. So a lot of my work is not an intimate teaching situation. And I was asked whether I want to be a Year 1 coordinator, which I accepted, and I like that role because that allows me to develop relationships with students on a group basis, on a one-to-one basis, to get to learn to know names, to also come to understand some of the concerns that students have. So I hold that role very dear in my practice. So I also do lots of other things. I'm a lead tutor, I mentor, all of the things that teacher educators do. I go out and talk into schools and things like that. So I've got a multi-layered practice, but those are the things that I would like to present to you this morning in terms of my context as being relevant. So what has my research focus been over the last 2 or 3 years? Well, my key focus has been on improvement of practice, and that has absolutely come out of my move into higher education, because as a primary practitioner of many years standing, I was able to tick boxes, and I think there's many practitioners out there who learn to do that. I could tick the Ofsted boxes. Ofsted, fortunately, thank the Lord, loved me. So I was all right, I could tick Ofsted boxes. I had good communication with parents. I fulfilled the Senko role in the way that was satisfactory. So I reached a stage in my career where I was comfortable, never drifting, because always I would consider myself a reflective practitioner, but I was comfortable within the teaching and learning situation. And when I moved into St Mary's, that changed, because I was put into a situation where I was unable to build the relationships on which I founded the teaching and learning situation. And I had taken those for granted, because within a classroom situation of 30 where you spend all day with these small children and you learn to you sit with them, you talk to them, you relate to them, I had taken for granted how important that relational aspect was to my teaching. And when it suddenly came where I was standing at the front and looking at tiers of students behind me, I suddenly realised that actually the values that I held dear were actually being negated in my practice. I felt that my teaching and learning should be based on relationships, and I wasn't able to get that going. So as soon as I arrived at St Mary's, I became what Jack calls a living contradiction. I was holding and looking and interrogating my values around practice, but when I actually came to my day-to-day work, I wasn't living those values out. So for me, the overriding question became, how do I improve my practice? How do I move this situation on for me? How do I improve this problematic teaching and learning situation, given that I couldn't change the logistics of my day-to-day work? So alongside that, at the same time, colleagues and I were asked to become research active. And we were given the opportunity to explore self-study action research as a methodology. And the two things for me fitted like a glove. My situation, anxious about my practice, experiencing myself as Jack's idea of a living contradiction, and here was self-study action research. So what I want to talk about for the rest of this presentation is how going through a self-study action research process has allowed me to, I think, improve my practice and give evidence of that. So through researching this, I've claimed to know how to do this, and I have generated theories of practice, and I'm going to give you some evidence, hopefully, of that.